Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bytesized podcast. My name is Christian Freeman. Normally on this show, I interview people doing interesting or creative things in technology. So in the last couple episodes, I've interviewed people building nutrition products, taking on kind of their own personal scientific experiments, people who are indie developers, et cetera, really anyone doing kind of interesting and creative work. Today is kind of a special episode, however. It's going to be slightly different, and that is because the focus of this episode is talking about my new Patreon feed. So what this means specifically for the show is that there's going to be a couple additions. The main thing for the show is premium episodes. So the show comes out every other week, usually. That's how the schedule usually shakes out. But with the addition of the Patreon, kind of the model for patrons, one of the perks of the producer plan, which I'll talk about in a little bit here, is a additional podcast episode every other week. So there'll actually be something coming out weekly, which is cool. So this is kind of considered the first premium episode. It's going to be on both the premium feed and the normal, non-premium feed, just as kind of a teaser to what this will look like normally. So in this episode, the first of the premium episodes, I want to kind of introduce the format, talk a little bit about the Patreon setup that I've been working on, and then also answer a couple questions that listeners have had in the last couple weeks, and like I said, just kind of give you a sense of what this format is going to look like. So if you're not familiar with Patreon, basically the way that it works is that you can become a patron of someone's work, someone doing creative work on the internet. And there are a variety of different tiers based on the price that you're paying per month. So I've set up 4 tiers. Of course, this could change in the future. This might be different by the time you hear this episode. But I want to just go through them real quick and talk a little bit about what they'll allow me to do creatively and also what kind of perks you would get as a patron at that level. So the first is what I call the PAL tier. All of these kind of have funny names. And this is for people donating $1 or more per month. And this is just kind of if you're generally a fan of my work and you want to support it in whatever way you can, you'll get added to my mailing list, which is where I share new YouTube videos, podcast episodes, any new projects that I'm launching, courses, training material, stuff like that. So that's kind of the first thing. And if you enjoy my work, but maybe you don't want to, or like maybe you don't have the funds to give huge support every month, totally understandable. And if the PAL plan, any support is appreciated. So the producer plan, which is $5 or more per month, is kind of where things get exciting. In particular, it has a focus, some of the rewards on this podcast. So as a $5 or more supporter, you'll get a shout out at the end of the podcast, at the end of every podcast episode. So on the main feed, when I'm kind of wrapping up the show, I'll shout you out there. You'll also get access to the premium episodes of the podcast. So that's, this episode and the ones that come out every other week now after this. You'll also get access to exclusive monthly YouTube videos. So this is another aspect of kind of my work online is my YouTube channel, where I talk about programming and kind of give people instruction and tutorials on how to do stuff with code. You're going to get access to exclusive monthly videos there. You'll also get access to my private chat group. So this is where I talk with supporters of my work, past students in my training programs. This is where you can really kind of pick my brain on any kind of programming questions or career questions, all that kind of stuff. You'll also get access to a small cryptocurrency trading group that I manage called Trade. It's not a investment trading group. I don't necessarily give investment advice. It's more of a casual place where There is, I think, almost 200 of us now talking about cryptocurrency trading. So next up is the partner plan. So this is $10 or more per month. So if you become a supporter at this level, first off, thank you. It's awesome. You're going to get some extra stuff. So the main thing is you're going to get access to my vault of online programming courses. So this is many hours of tutorials and high quality training material, videos, code samples, etc., in a couple different topics, including Ruby on Rails, JavaScript, a couple other things as well. You'll also get discounts on future training opportunities. So any kind of training sessions that I run or any courses coming out in the future, online courses, you'll get discounts to those. And of course, you'll also get kind of the previous rewards as well. So you'll get a shout out on the show, premium episodes, etc., etc. The next one up, and this is kind of the highest tier, is the executive producer tier. This is $20 or more per month. If you are supporting me at this level, really, thank you so much. And there's going to be, I guess the first perk here is you will pretty much always have a direct line to me to suggest content, to request videos. Really, if you want to get in touch about anything, I'm all ears at this level. You'll also get one 30-minute video tutorial on any educational subject of your choice, probably programming. Of course, this is kind of on my approval of what the subject is, mostly just so I can teach it well. So if you request that I do like a woodworking video, I don't know anything about woodworking, so I'm not going to be able to give you a great tutorial. If you request something on, Ruby on Rails or writing JavaScript, it's probably a lot more reasonable. So the way this will work is you'll request the video, I'll work on it, I'll make it for you, and then I'll share it with you early before I publish it on YouTube. So you're directly helping contribute to new content on the channel, which is awesome. So all of this stuff is really just a way to support the work I'm doing online. I'm in a pretty fortunate position where I don't actually rely on income from the podcast or on YouTube to pay the bills, to pay rent and stuff like that. But it is obviously great to be kind of to have your work supported by people. So so I encourage you to check it out if you enjoy the premium episode as it kind of unfolds here, and you want more of that as well. All of this stuff is available at my Patreon page, which I'll put in the show notes, but also just the URL here, patreon.com/I'mKMF. Okay, so in terms of what the premium episode's actually going to look like, it's going to be a little bit more casual than the interview episodes. So it's going to be kind of lightly edited. The main episodes are edited a lot more, mostly just to kind of keep the conversation going. This is going to be a lot more casual, just me, kind of sitting in my office and just kind of talking about whatever. So for some people that format might be interesting. If not, that's totally fine. But to start with, I wanted to kind of explore some questions that people asked about the show, about the work I'm doing. And so kind of the first question, and I've gotten this question in a lot of different formats. It's a pretty common question. It's just, how do I produce the show? Everyone's always interested in gear. So two things. The first thing I want to say is that you don't need good gear to make a podcast. You don't need a really expensive microphone. You don't need, $500 headphones or anything like that. You can really get started with whatever. That being said, my background in music production, audio engineering, I do enjoy good gear, and I think, from my perspective at least, the gear I'm using is pretty legit. I like it a lot. I think it sounds good. But for instance, I've recorded projects like video projects and things like that using like iPhone microphones, things like that. It's definitely doable without any kind of crazy equipment budget to start a podcast. So specifically, The way that recording the show works, there's obviously the kind of the hardware aspect, which I'll talk about first, which is the stuff here in the office with me. There's also the software aspect, which is recording the show, especially with guests, online guests. That can be kind of interesting. So what does that actually look like? So first off, in the hardware department, so my microphone that I use is a Shure SM7B. It's a really great microphone that has, I think, a pretty strong history of being used in, like radio stations and kind of recording booths in general. Back when I started making courses online, when I started doing, especially working with Pluralsight, they gave me kind of a small equipment stipend. I had already had some gear. I think I was using like a Yeti microphone or something like that at the time. They gave me a small stipend to go and buy some equipment. And so because I had a lot of the stuff I needed already, I decided to buy a nicer microphone. So I bought a Shure SM7B. I've been using it for like 4 years and I'm pretty happy with it. A couple things to know about it is that you do need, I think you would call it like an attenuator or something like that. And basically you have this box that you plug the microphone into and then run a cable out from the box into your actual audio interface. So I use the Cloud Lifter CL1, I think is what it's called. Basically, you can think of it as just turning the volume up. I would say that's probably the simplest description of it. I'm sure there's more complex things going on. But I run the Shure SM7B into my Cloud Lifter box, which goes into a Focusrite Sapphire, I believe is what it's called. It's like a cheap $100 USB audio interface. I just run XLR cables out from the mic into the Cloud Lifter, which goes out into the Sapphire. So you might wonder, like, I just said gear doesn't matter to make a good podcast, so why do I have all this stuff? And the answer is just like over the years, I've collected kind of these pieces separately as kind of these disparate things. And at a point, once I got the new mic, I was like, oh, I have everything I need to have a really nice mic setup. So I have, I make music. I have some studio monitors, the KRK Rocket speakers. And I needed a way to run audio out from my computer, right, in like whatever music production program I'm using into those speakers. So that's when I got the Sapphire. I already had a microphone, but when I got the SM7B, I got the Cloud Lifter as well, to be able to use it. And suddenly I had kind of the whole setup there. So that's how that worked. And again, I'm really happy with the setup. I just recently upgraded to what is it? I'm looking for the box here. For a Rode PSA 1 mic stand. It's like a desk mic stand, the kind that you would see like in a radio station or something like that, where the mic kind of floats off the desk. That's really nice. I do a lot of YouTube content, video calls and stuff like that. So this stuff just kind of is used constantly, not just for the podcast. And I would say in general, that's when I would recommend potentially spending more money on gear, right? If you're going to be using it like daily or most of, multiple times a week, then maybe it's worthwhile for you. Otherwise, I feel like a Yeti mic, or I have a blue snowball that I use. I plug that into like my PlayStation when I play games with other people. Any of those kind of mics are fine for the most part. So for software, things are, I'm actually pretty happy with the software situation right now. So I use a tool called Zencastr. Basically what Zencastr does is it's a in-browser recording application. And I can just send a link to the guest. They join that call. And the best part about Zencastr is that you can record both sides of the call individually. And then once the call is finished, it will upload that file to Dropbox. Or files, I should say. So in the case of my call with Dave, the last episode of the show that I did, I finished the call. I guess I gave him the link. We started the call, and then when I finished, I had two MP3 files, which were just the raw file from each side of the call. So this makes it a lot easier to edit. I can kind of cut out, especially for me, I have the habit of saying or kind of I guess not talking over the other person, but doing a lot of like, yep, Oh, totally. That kind of stuff, like those agreement kind of things, which in conversation in person is fine, right? But when you're listening to a podcast, it can get kind of annoying to have the people talking over each other. It's a work in progress. I'm working on not doing that, but having two MP3 files makes it easier to edit that kind of stuff out. In terms of actually editing the show, so I use Logic. I'm in Logic right now recording this. The reason that I use Logic is I think it's really good for audio editing. This is, Apple's music, I guess, DAW, which is like digital audio workstation. One of the things that I like the most, I was just talking to someone about this, about why I use Logic for podcasts, is it has a trim silence feature where it basically looks at the waveform and says, if it's under this decibel limit for this amount of time, it will automatically delete that sound. So that makes it really great for getting rid of kind of background noise when I'm in between talking or when the guest isn't talking. I would say it probably cuts down the editing time by like literally 50% or more. I'm not sure where I learned that trick from. I think someone might have posted it, like another podcast where I listened to maybe tweeted about that or something like that. But it's really useful, and it's the reason that I edit in Logic. Other things, I host the podcast on simplecast.fm. I could host my own podcast feed, right? I'm a programmer. I have I could write some script to generate the RSS feed myself, but I just don't really want to. I just have so much other stuff that I'm doing. It's just like, I just would like to give you the file and have you host it and have a kind of decent design. It's not perfect. There's some things that bother me. There's no like embed links on Twitter or anything like that when you post the tweet, which is frustrating. But in general, it works fine. As far as I know, I haven't had any kind of downtime or anything like that. It also has statistics and things like that. I can see where people are downloading from, what podcast app they're using, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the workflow. That's kind of the equipment I use and things like that. I imagine in some future episodes, if people have kind of more detailed questions, I can answer those. Like, for instance, maybe how I pick my guests, or maybe what my process is for picking interview questions and how that whole thing works out. But people have kind of asked, the basics. It's the kind of questions that I've asked many people who do stuff online as well. And I'm totally not afraid to kind of spill the beans on how I do stuff. I think it's better to be open about that kind of thing. But that's how that stuff goes. The other question that someone asked me this week, and I haven't really planned anything out for this, so I just want to talk about it kind of broadly. Over the last couple of weeks on Twitter, I've been sharing some videos and GIFs of my kind of experiments in game design. So I've been learning how Unity works, which is a free game engine. Well, I think it's free until you actually publish a game. But for like hobbyists and developers like me, basically like a student of this stuff, I'm still learning how it works. It's totally free. So I'm not really sure what to talk about, and I guess I can just talk kind of broadly about this, but I know that at least a couple people were interested. So I've been playing video games forever, since I was like 5. And I think as for many people, it's probably the reason that I got into programming. And I mean, the reason why I was into computers originally was video games. But I've never really done any game development itself. I've kind of tinkered a little bit with some different game engines. I'm trying to think of them, like Flixel. There's one that was a Lua one, Love, I think it was called, like the Love game engine. But for whatever reason, it just never stuck. So for a while now, I've been wanting to make a couple games, or at least kind of tell some story in some way that's not code. Or you can't really tell fiction stories in code. You can't do narratives, and I love a good narrative. So recently I've been experimenting with trying to figure out how Unity works, with the eventual goal of making at least 1 or 2 games this year. So like shorter narrative based games. I haven't quite figured out the best way to do that. yet. So what engine to use and how to, like, what kind of game it's going to be. But I've been playing with Unity to kind of understand, I guess, to understand my options. In particular, I like games that have kind of a maybe like a choose your own adventure kind of vibe. So one of my favorite game series, and this is kind of a deep cut, it's called the Zero Escape series. So 999 was the first in that. Virtue's Last Reward is the second, and that's my favorite. Might be my favorite game of all time, or definitely in the top 3. I really enjoy this style of kind of exposition, plot-heavy games with some degree of interactivity. I think it's actually a really interesting model that's done really well and is very underappreciated. There's a lot of very narrative-heavy, very interactive games, like Half-Life or Prey, which I've been playing recently, which I like a lot. But in terms of just taking kind of the basics of a video game, which is combining like digital art and audio and things like that, I think that's still very much a vein that has yet to be tapped into. So I've been kind of experimenting with how to do that myself. So Unity is one way of doing it. There's a game engine called RenPy, which is for writing visual novels, which is kind of what this genre can be called sometimes. But I still just haven't found kind of the best way to do this yet. So I'm still working on it, and the eventual goal is to at least make like a short game or maybe 2 short games this year. In April, I'm going to be participating in the, I think it's called the Ludum Dare game jam, which is like over the weekend, you make a game based on a theme that is announced at the beginning of the weekend. So there's a whole community of people making games over those 3 days. So right now I'm basically wrapping my head around, kind of the normal game conventions of how this stuff works, and eventually trying to be prepared for that, for the first game jam, to make something, and then hopefully the second half of the year sitting down and getting the chance to make something, probably only like a couple hours long, but just an experiment in what this kind of game will look like. And so far, my impression of making games is that the coding part of it is, it can be difficult, but Unity really abstracts a lot of that away from you. So it really has, first off, a great set of assets in the asset store where people can sell their code and they can sell their art and things like that on there, which has been a really great way for me to prototype stuff. And I haven't actually had to write too much code yet. So I think it's C# is the language for Unity, and I haven't really had to write a ton of it. I've just been having more fun kind of figuring out level design and lighting and 3D animation and stuff like that. I imagine I'll have more to say on this, for instance, when I do my game jam project and do maybe like a postmortem on the show or something like that. But in general, my impression of it has been really good. It's been really interesting. I'm hoping that, like a year from now, I'll still be working on this stuff and I can maybe have a more nuanced take. I also would like to go to the Game Developers Conference, which is taking place here in a couple weeks. I'm going to go next year. I kind of missed out on some of the like reasonable ticket prices for someone who doesn't work in the game industry. I don't think I can really justify spending like $2,000 on a ticket. And actually here in the next couple of weeks after GDC, I'm going to be getting a couple of people on the show that work in the games industry. So a couple of people I've been recently talking to and things like that as I've been learning this stuff. So that should be really, really fun and interesting. So I think that is pretty much it for today. So this premium episode format, like I said, is going to be pretty casual. I'm just going to kind of talk about what stuff I've been working on, what's interesting me, and answer questions. For instance, I'd like to talk in the next couple of weeks about kind of my, I guess, my style to creative work and how I think about breaking down problems, how I think about productivity and things like that. I would like to think I have maybe somewhat of a contrarian view on that, that I'm not quite sure how to articulate yet, but I'm still working on figuring that out. So that will be kind of an interesting experiment for this episode. or this episode format. I'd also like to talk a little bit about like training and education and things like that, which is the kind of the other thing that I do besides being a software engineer. So my approach to teaching people, especially teaching them programming, which is kind of different than teaching them, say, writing or I don't know, geometry or something like that. It's kind of a weird thing to teach, in that you have to take certain considerations on how to do it well into account. But I will save all of that for other episodes. So basically what's going to happen now is this episode's going to go out, and then next week we will return to the normal interview format. And then after that, you will start seeing premium episodes alternating with these normal show episodes. And those will be available exclusively on the Patreon feed. So if you want to get those, again, patreon.com/I'mKMF. You'll start seeing those pop up, starting with this one here in the next couple of weeks. And in the meantime, thank you for listening. This is the part where I do kind of the normal spiel about finding the show and things like that, which won't normally be in the premium episode, but because this is on the main feed, I'll add this stuff here. So, and there's a car honking in the distance, which is great for me recording audio. This is, like I said, not as edited of an episode. So if you want to help us, help the show grow in popularity and continue being recorded and things like that, there are now two things you can do. So the previous thing that you could do, which you can still do, but now is joined by a second item. Could I make this more confusing to describe? Holy smokes. The first thing you can do is leave a iTunes review. So this is not, as I've said in the past, not a vanity metric. It's not to make me feel good about the show. It actually helps iTunes suggest the show to new listeners, to potential new listeners. So if you enjoy the show and you enjoy what I do and the guests that we've had on, this really does help. It's super appreciated. The second thing you can do is obviously support the show on Patreon. So for $5 a month, you will get a shout out right about here at the end of the podcast. And you'll also get access to these premium episodes every other week, along with some other stuff. So patreon.com/I'mKMF. Your support is obviously much appreciated. It means the world. If you want to follow the show on Twitter, it's twitter.com/bitesizedpod. You can also find the podcast at bytesizedpodcast.com. You can find me on Twitter. It's just at I'mKMF, I'mKMF. You can also find my website, the other projects I'm doing, at my kind of, I guess, revamped umbrella website. I don't have a great word for it yet. It's just bytesized.xyz. So this will be where I will blog about new projects, new episodes, things like that. And as it'll also link to my training courses and all that kind of stuff if you're interested in that. So it's become kind of the new hub for my work, I guess. So thanks for listening, and I will catch you next week with back to our normal interview format. Have a great rest of your week, and thanks again.